Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today on Grammaticus Books, we're talking about The Thing in the Crypt by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter, the very first story and the first of their Lancer and Ace paperback series here, with this one being #1 Conan, published in 1967. And L. Sprague de Camp, he organized these stories by Robert E. Howard and himself with his pastiche, put them in a chronological order, and The Thing in the Crypt is the very first one in the very first book. Because why put a genuine Robert E. Howard story as your #1 story in your book about Robert E. Howard's Conan? That would be just silly when you can put your own pastiche in here. And that's what he did. But the reason that we're talking about it is because The Thing in the Crypt is actually a solid story. It's a very good pastiche story here by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. Now, I'm going through and I'm rereading, I should say, all of the pastiche stories here from this Ace or Lance series, and I'm up to book number 10, which is Conan the Avenger. And I have to say that The Thing in the Crypt is one of the best, if not the best, pastiche story that I've read to date so far. And for that reason, I think it deserves getting talked about here on the channel. Why it's such a good story? Because it is an actual original idea. It's a very original idea for a story. It's well written. It's one of the best written L. Sprague de Camp stories here in the series to date so far that I've got through. And it has legs. It actually resonated with readers and jumped the bounds of these Lancer and Ace stories. It has an existence in adaptations outside of these stories because it is such a good tale that was woven here by Lynn Carter and L. Sprague de Camp back in 1967. So the story itself, it was actually at the idea of Lynn Carter. It was created by Lynn Carter. It's his idea, and he fleshed out the framework for it, but he did it for his hero, originally Draugr of Lemuria, which was a series written by Lynn Carter here back in the 1960s and 70s. But he never finished the story, never finished the tale. So L. Sprague de Camp takes that framework and takes that skeleton of a story, and then he fleshes out the meat upon the bones and fleshes it out and writes it here for The Thing in the Crypt. No pun intended of putting the meat on the bones for Thing in the Crypt, but that's what he does. And he does it fairly well. The story itself, like I said, it's the very first story, and stories that were ordered chronologically by L. Sprague de Camp, meaning it's the earliest story of Conan the Barbarian within this series of 12 books. It's Conan at his most youthful, and he has gone to Hyperborea on a raiding party where he was captured, he has killed his jailer, and he is now fleeing Hyperborea on foot southward while he's being pursued by a pack of wolves. And as the wolves are closing in and literally nipping at his heels, he dives into an opening in the rocks in the side of a hill. And he dives into this opening to get away from the wolves, and it tumbles him down into this dark, dank cavern. The wolves don't pursue him in, and he takes advantage of this respite to explore this black cavern. And as he's stumbling around, he keeps bumping into pieces of wood, which he then gathers together, gets a little flint, and gets a fire going inside of the cavern. And as the flames from the fire light up, as the fire grows and it illuminates the inside of what he thinks is a cave, he soon discerns he's not in a cave, but he's in a burial tomb that has been carved out of the inside of this hill, out of the solid rock, this ancient burial tomb. And at the back of it is a solid stone carved throne upon which sits this gigantic mummified warrior king in full battle armor with a legendary sword across his lap. And he is just thrilled because the sword is exactly what he needs in order to deal with the wolves. It's a sword worthy of a king. It's a sword upon whose keen blade's edge you could forge a kingdom. And so he goes up and he grabs it, and in his youthful exuberance, he's swinging the steel sword above his head. And at this point in the story, L. Sprague de Camp has just got some great descriptive imagery going. He's really in his stride. He's really kind of outdoing himself for his writing at this point in the book and this point in this story. The story has flaws, and we'll get to it. But at this point, he's got great imagery going. And he's talking about how the fire is casting glinting light off of this steel blade as he whirls it about his head, that is creating these golden meteors that are going around and illuminating the inside of this burial chamber and this ancient king in the back. And then Conan is so excited about finding this sword, he lets out a giant war cry, a Cimmerian war cry that reverberates through the chamber. And then slowly, the mummified king in the back answers the cry, answers the challenge to battle, and he slowly stands up off of the throne, sending a chill of supernatural dread up the spine of Conan the Barbarian. It's the one thing that he fears is the supernatural. And then a big fight ensues between Conan with the sword that he's taken from the king and this ancient mummified warrior king who's trying to kill this interloper to return the peace to his cavern in which he has been resting for millennia. And it's a great scene. But unfortunately, it's at this point in the story that L. Sprague de Camp stumbles a little bit. As I've been reading through these stories, and like I said, I'm up to number 10 now, I think L. Sprague de Camp has difficulty writing conflict, writing battle scenes. He tends to not write them in a way that is engaging, in a way that's visceral, that Robert E. Howard could, and he has a tendency to end them very abruptly. And that does happen here in this battle scene with the thing in the crypt. You can see as a reader where this battle is going, where the trajectory of it's going to go, where it needs to go. And in fact, it does head that direction. But L. Sprague de Camp doesn't handle it well. And like I said, he just cuts it off so suddenly that I think he left a lot of meat on the bone with this story. This story is only 18 pages long, and it probably should have been around 19 to 20 pages, with those extra pages being just expanding out, putting extra meat on that story of the battle there in the crypt. And if L. Sprague de Camp had done that and done it in a convincing manner, in a well-written manner, as well-written as his descriptive imagery was prior to the battle, this would have gone from being a really solid, good story to just a great story that you could stack up with a lot of actual Robert E. Howard stories if he had been able to do that. Now, this story really resonates with the readers. And one of the reasons that I think it does resonate with readers is because it taps into a primal memory. It really reaches out, this story that was conceived by Lynn Carter, and just taps into this primal memory that people have of ancient tombs and ancient kings and ancient warrior swords and weapons that they can take out of them. And that was what Robert E. Howard was really good at doing. That's why his stories, I think, were so well received and were so enjoyable to read, is because Howard had that ability to tap into those old memories, and that they seemed right. They were stories that if they didn't happen, there were stories that should have happened, which is why it's been so successful. And it's why it was able to leap the bounds of these stories and had a life outside of them. And the first adaptation of this story was in 1978, issue number 92, Conan the Barbarian in Marvel Comics, adapted by Roy Thomas with pencils by Sal Buscema. John Buscema was on vacation, so they got his kid brother Sal to pencil it, and you got Ernie Chan doing the inks. And it's competent. It's pretty well done. It's a good story. Sal Buscema does a decent job here. However, I think if John Buscema had drawn this, that you could have had just a fantastic epic tale going on here within Conan the Barbarian number 92. It's still good, but this would have been, I think, a lot better if John Buscema had been able to draw it as well. The next adaptation you get is 1982 with John Milius. He writes the script and directs Conan the Barbarian, the movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in that movie, Milius takes this tale, The Thing in the Crypt, and he lifts it up complete and total and then drops it right into the set of his movie, right in the middle of the movie, en toto. And they film it with Arnold Schwarzenegger and the wolves and going into the tomb. You have the ancient king on the tomb. The only thing that Milius changes is that when Conan, aka Arnold Schwarzenegger, issues his battle cry, the ancient king in the tomb, instead of rising up to meet it, he just kind of moves a little bit, and you think he's going to get up, but then just his helmet falls off, and Schwarzenegger gets a little bit of a moment of dread, but then goes back to his sword. And I think the reason that they didn't animate that fight is because back in 1982, they didn't have the CGI to do it properly and do that type of an animation. I don't think his effects was up to it, and he didn't want that look to the movie. The next animation after that, or adaptation, I should say, was in the year 2022, just 2 years ago, when it was adapted for the movie The Northman, starring Alexander Skarsgård, where Alexander Skarsgård's character Amleth has to go and retrieve this ancient battle blade from a dolmen or a tor, this ancient burial tomb, this burial mound called the draugr. The blade is the draugr. And he needs this blade in order to complete the revenge that he's trying to seek. And he goes into this tomb, and here in 2022, they have the CGI and all of the special effects in order to properly animate that battle scene between Amleth now and this warrior king who's now mummified in his armor. And it's a fantastic battle scene. If you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend it. That's a great movie, The Northman from 2022 with Alexander Skarsgård. Check it out. And I would also argue that Karl Edward Wagner put elements of The Thing in the Crypt into his short story here in Death Angel's Shadow. It's a collection of short stories. And one of the short stories in here does take elements out of Lynn Carter's idea here for The Thing in the Crypt and incorporates it in here. And again, it's because it just has such a deep resonance, such a deep primal memory that it just reaches out and grabs people by their guts. And that's why this story works so well. Now, Lynn Carter may not have come up with this story on his own. It might not be his original idea. There was a Icelandic Viking tale, Viking saga from the 14th century called Greta's Saga that also talks about an old king, an ancient king, mummified and inside of a burial tomb where the hero has to go into that tomb and fight this mummified king in order to get the sword, a magical sword, for his quest in Greta's Saga. And Lynn Carter was a student of history. I know that he read the sagas. Greta's Saga isn't one of the more well-known ones, but perhaps he read that, and that's where he got his idea from. But to the best of my knowledge, Lynn Carter coming up with that idea for Thongor and then being fleshed out by L. Sprague de Camp here in Conan is the first time that that idea really appeared fully fleshed out. I'm not aware of anybody else who did that prior to L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter in 1967. If somebody knows of somebody who did it prior, please let me know down in the comments section. I don't think anybody did, though. And if you've read The Thing in the Crypt and you have an opinion on it, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, put it down in the comments section below. I'd love to hear it. And with that, I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.